Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me us fine? Good. So we are delighted to have Sir John Kay with us. John is a very special person for us because not only is he one of Britain's leading economists, but he was the founding dean of the Said Business School. John, welcome back home. So today we have the honor and the privilege of having a discussion with John about his latest book. The book is titled The Corporation in the 21st Century, and there's a very provocative subtitle to it, Why Almost Everything We Are Told About Business is Wrong. So I'm sure we'll get a chance to discuss and explore that a little bit more. A little bit about John before we get started. So he's a fellow of the British Academy and the Royal Society of Edinburgh. And he has held a chair at London Business School for many years. His current book, which we'll discuss today, was shortlisted for the Financial Times Best Book Award. But he's the winner of other awards, such as the Senior Wincott Award for Financial Journalism for his Financial Times columns. I'm sure some of you have read his columns. Other People's Money won the Saltire Prize for non-fiction and was shortlisted for the Orwell Prize for political writing. His other books include, among others, The Long and the Short of It, Greed is Dead, and Radical Uncertainty. So John is clearly someone who thinks very deeply about business, its links to society, how the business trends are evolving. And to frame this next 50 minutes or so, we'll have John just share a few slides, 2 or 3 slides, just to frame the discussion and the thoughts. We will have a discussion out here on the stage for 20 minutes or so. And then I really want to bring you back into the discussion. So I really want this to be an interactive session. So please, if you have questions, note them down. And I will come to you and give us enough time in the session to have a discussion around this. So John, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Matra. My subject, as you've implied, is the relationship between business and society. And what I want to suggest today is that we need to rethink that, reset it. Now, if I give a talk like this to a general audience, which is what I've been doing a bit in the last 2 or 3 months, you will inevitably be asked questions about what is in the news this morning. That's the book. I'm not going to go through it in detail, it's quite long. And I hope you will buy a copy afterwards if you haven't already done so. But what is in the news every morning has a good deal to say about the relationship between business and society. I can't do better than this to illustrate that we have an issue which we need to resolve, and there are many different views on how it ought to be resolved. But while that is rather extreme, even more extreme is a case with which we might not be so familiar. The case of Arkansas teachers leading a class action against Goldman Sachs is something which was finally settled early last year. It's a case which has been running for 10 years, and I'm really surprised it hasn't had more publicity than it has received. The case is about the Goldman Sachs ethics statement. The Goldman Sachs ethics statement, well, it's mentioned in the accompanying verbiage written by the chief executive of Goldman Sachs and famous disc jockey David Solomon. And you needn't trouble yourself, I'm going to think a great deal with that. What you do need to know is that the ethics statement begins, our clients' interests always come first. And Arkansas teachers and their other pension funds, were suing Goldman Sachs on the grounds that this statement gave a misleading impression that Goldman Sachs was the kind of company that Arkansas teachers should invest their savings in. What's interesting about that story is the Goldman Sachs defense. The defense is not, as you might expect, that the statement is true. Our client's interests always come first. It is rather that the statement is so obviously not true that no one could reasonably have been misled into investing in Goldman Sachs by taking that statement seriously. And you might think Goldman Sachs is unrepresentative of American business. You then have to recognize that, for example, the American Chamber of Commerce filed a friend of the court brief in support of Goldman Sachs, which said of all the client's interests always come first. All companies make statements of this kind. If the finding of the court, the lower court, were to be upheld, they would in future make statements of this kind at their peril. Apparently that was a problem to be avoided. It was not to be avoided by companies making sure these statements were true, or indeed making more modest statements of ethics, which they sought to observe. What this Goldman Sachs story illustrates to me is the loss of legitimacy which we've created in relation to business and society, as does the Elon Musk's performance. And as does, only last week, I found this on the BBC, recognizing a protest by a group of vets. What has happened in the vet industry, or the vet activity, is what has happened in a number of other practices in the UK, which is that vets have been consolidated by private equity-owned firms. And this story is one in which vets are protesting against being given targets for the number of treatments which they make on the pets which are brought to them. I suspect I'm not alone in this room in thinking that if I take my pet to a pet vet, I would like it to be a vet who was motivated by concern for animals rather than concern to see how many treatments were necessary to ensure that he could be paid his bonus for the month. I talked about this in the context of a celebration of Adam Smith recently, because, of course, the analogy is that the visible hand is clutching the pet. The invisible hand, on the other hand, is rifling the pockets of the owner who has brought the pet along. What I want to suggest, just with these three examples, and I could give many others, is that we need to reset the relationship between business and society. We've messed this up over the last 200 years. And we've messed it up by failing to reflect the changes which have occurred in business and the nature of production during and across the Industrial Revolution. We talk about capitalism. We have in our minds the idea that business is the creation of a group of capitalists who set up plants and who induce workers to be employed in them and make profits for themselves by doing so. We have a connection in that model of capitalism between the people who provide the capital, the people who run the businesses, and the people who control the activities of the business. Connection from capital to control of business. Any of you will be in a plane recently. You may well have thought that the airline whose logo was painted on the fuselage owned the plane which you got in. It almost certainly doesn't. The largest owner of civil aircraft in the world is a company called AerCap, based in Dublin, which employs regulatory experts and bookkeepers, but no pilots. It leases aircraft to airlines around the world. You might have thought at least the company that owns the aircraft owns the engines. It almost certainly doesn't. What airlines do when they want to take on board new planes, what they do is they make a contract for engine services with a manufacturer of engines like Rolls-Royce or Pratt & Whitney. That means that the Rolls-Royce will ensure that engines are provided for a period of 10 years. They may or may not be the same engines. Rolls-Royce may choose to upgrade them. They will maintain them. You might think that meant that Rolls-Royce owns the engine. Generally, it doesn't. Ownership of the engine will be passed to a leasing company like GATX. When you pass an Amazon warehouse, you see Amazon painted along the sides. That may lead you to think that Amazon owns the warehouse. Amazon almost certainly doesn't. The largest owner of Amazon, they call them fulfillment centers, but the largest owner of fulfillment centers is a San Francisco-based real estate company called Prologis. You might think at least Amazon owns the goods which are inside these warehouses. That probably isn't true either. What Amazon does is it sells the products to you and collects revenue from you, on average, sometime before it's actually paid the supplier of the goods. If you look at the Amazon balance sheet, you will see that its inventory is negative. It has sold the goods before it has actually paid for them. This goes on. The modern business world is no longer controlled by capital and capitalists. AirCap, Prologis, and the like do not run Amazon and other businesses. They provide capital as a service. The nature of modern business is that capital is another service which people who run businesses buy in just the same way as they buy in electricity or water or legal or accountant services. And the people who provide these services have no more control over influence over the business, or indeed competence to do so, than do the water company or the electricity company. In this fundamental sense, modern business is very different. And modern business is, of course, run by professional managers. We can talk later about the ways in which we do and don't make these professional managers accountable for these things. There's a joke which I rather treasure, which says that George Bush once told Tony Blair, the trouble with the French is they don't have a word for entrepreneur. I've checked, and I'm afraid the statement is apocryphal. But it's an interesting story because it encourages one to think of the original French meaning of entrepreneur. The entrepreneur, if one looks at the French roots, is the person who puts things together. That is, the way in which you operate modern business is you put together a collection of capabilities. That's the nature of the modern firm. It's defined not by its capital or by its plant. It's defined by its capabilities. And its success depends on the adaptability of these capabilities to the changing needs of its actual and potential employees and customers. We need to think of modern business as a collection of capabilities. I wish we would stop using the term capitalism. It draws attention to business in a way that misunderstands the nature of business today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. John, please. Some very profound thoughts out there. And let's begin by exploring the picture that you started with. Elon Musk President Trump, and not to forget Elon Musk's young child. One can argue and say that, well, what we are witnessing in the US is some kind of a reset. You argue that we need a reset in the relationship of business and society. How do you describe the reset that we are potentially seeing in the US? How would you describe it? Is it good? Is it bad?
I don't think it's either. I mean, I don't think either Trump or Musk have much idea what they're doing. But what their performance does is upset traditional ideas of the relationship between business and the business and industry. And I think in many ways that's a good thing if it prompts us to rethink what the relationship between business and industry should be. That is altogether to the good.
So you think what's happening in the US actually is good in some way?
No, I don't think it's good. But I think that we need to reassess these ideas is very definitely the case. I often go back to the story. Well, it's worth going back 30 years, actually, to a moment at which, in some ways, it bore a resemblance to where we are today in Britain. Because in 1996, there was about to be elected, everyone knew it was about to be elected, a new Labour government, which was looking for ideas as to how it was going to transform the economy. And Tony Blair picked up the word stakeholding. And I remember being asked to go along and talk at a CBI conference about what this word stakeholding meant. And what I did was I used the history of ICI, then Britain's largest industrial company. It had been so for most of the 20th century. It was formed in the 1920s by merger of a dyestuffs and explosives company. It declared its purpose to be the responsible application of chemistry and related sciences to business. In the 1930s, there were new opportunities to use chemistry in business. So ICI moved into petrochemicals and fertilizers. In the 1940s, in the Second World War and its aftermath, the future of chemistry and related sciences shifted in its business applications to fabrics and to pharmaceuticals. ICI set up a pharmaceutical division, which actually lost money for 20 years. It's hard to believe a similar company doing that now. But eventually in the 1960s, a team at ICI led by James Black, a young chemist, came up with beta blockers, which were the first effective drug against hypertension. And antihypertensive drugs quickly became a rather large profit earner for the company. And pharmaceuticals became, for the next 20 years, the driver of the company's profits. Black left ICI soon after that discovery and joined SmithKline. I might come back to that story later. But the point I will make at the moment is that in the early 90s, ICI changed its statement. The purpose of ICI, as it saw it, was no longer the responsible application of chemistry and related sciences to business. And the statement went on, through achievement of our aim, we will enhance the wealth and well-being of our customers, our employees, the communities in which we operate. That, I said, was the stakeholding view of the company. But ICI had changed it. In the 1990s, ICI's mission statement became, our purpose is to create shareholder value by focusing on businesses in which we have competitive advantage, cost leadership, and a well-established market position. You might have heard statements about that, or of that kind, before. I feel we now have a history. ICI's share price mirrored with remarkable precision the fortunes of Tony Blair. It reached a peak in the summer of 1997 and declined steadily thereafter until in 2007 what remained of ICI was taken over by the Dutch company AkzoNobel. You might think that was an exceptional case, except I could tell essentially the same story if I was talking about Britain's second leading industrial company in the early 90s, which was GEC, which went through a rather similar epiphany and a rather similar rapid decline. For me, doing business is about creating great businesses, and shareholder value follows from that. Someone who reviewed my book, actually a former English test cricketer now turned journalist, drew my attention to a book by a legendary American football coach, Bill Walsh, which had the title, "The Score Takes Care of Itself." That's the way round it is if you create businesses. And we started with Elon Musk, who is repeatedly referred to as the richest man in the world, which in a sense he is. But he's the richest man in the world not because he set out to become the richest man in the world, but because he set out to build great businesses in electric cars and space exploration. And the success of these businesses created the shareholder value we recognize there.
So can you just maybe for us, break down a little bit, what do you mean by a good business? So what would be the descriptive elements or core attributes?
A great business is one that has happy customers who get their goods and services at good prices. It has satisfied employees who are proud of working for the company. It's a business that makes money for its investors and shareholders. It's a business that is respected in the communities in which it operates. What I want to emphasize is that there isn't a single metric. Mm-hmm. It's not we have 20% for one of these and 43% for one of the others, and we add up these KPIs and we get a score for the totality. We don't know exactly what a great business is. We pretty much know one when we see it. And we also know that some businesses concentrate too much on some of these goals at the expense of others. And what a great manager does is he understands that balance. It's like steering a boat in a river, and you want to make sure you don't get too close to any of the banks.
Earlier, John, you mentioned the fact that, of course, the relationship with business society is very important. And different parts of the world, have different perspectives in terms of how society should relate to business. So when you talk about good business, I'm just curious about your views. Does the notion of a good business differ in the UK versus the US, or is it just a question of relative emphasis on different elements, as you mentioned earlier?
They do have different views. And one of the things I do in the book is I discuss the corporate legal position as it is in Britain, Germany, and the United States. And it's very different in each of these three. British executives, when I talk to them, high proportion of them believe that British law mandates shareholder priority and the creation of shareholder value. It doesn't. What British law says is that the duty of directors is to promote the success of the company. It goes on to say the success of the company for the benefit of the members, and it then says, in doing so, it will need to take account of the interests of others, of other stakeholders. That's British law. And emphatically, the duty to promote the success of the company is there. You could take that phrase out and say it's to serve the benefit, to promote the company for the benefit of the members, and it would read very differently and have a legal implication that's very different. German law, on the other hand, takes an explicit stakeholder position. It doesn't give priority to any particular group of stakeholders. American law is a more complicated case because American law for most of the corporate sector is Delaware law. You may not know, but there's an address in Delaware, which is ostensibly the headquarters of 16,000 companies. Few people would have heard of these companies if you actually turned up to ask where is Amazon, Microsoft, and so on. It's the registered office. What happens in the US is that states have competed with each other to attract corporate registration, which provides legal business and revenues for the state governments. And Delaware has been most aggressive in that particular combination. So Delaware law is different from either German or British law in these respects. And the key difference, actually, is that Delaware law is extremely management friendly. And that's the basis on which it has attracted so much corporate registration.
In your book, you actually write that as a result of the erosion of business ethics and the evidence of indefensible inequalities, the 21st century corporation faces a crisis of legitimacy. So what do you recommend business leaders should do to address this crisis and perhaps overcome it?
What I would want to see is something of, I've described the creation of great businesses. I would like to see managers whose purpose was to build great businesses in the way the people who built ICI, Amazon, and all these companies we've been talking about actually did. That's the emphasis I'd like to see. I'd like to see it promoted by politics. I'd like to see it promoted by asset managers who have an important role to play in this. I'd like to see it developed in this way by regulators. I'd like to adopt the idea that management is a professional activity, like other historic professions. And that means professions of the law, accountancy, medicine, and so on, were characterized by a body of standard knowledge that people needed to acquire to enter these professions. They added some kind of practice, apprenticeship, in effect, in the business. And they had a code of ethics which was specific to that kind of activity. In the first 60, 70 years of the 20th century, quite a lot of people in business believed that what they were doing and should be doing is creating a professional management activity akin to that. And indeed, the development of business schools was part of that development and part of that activity. Mm-hmm. That's what I think should happen. And I think business schools should have quite a large role to play in that development.
Well, you provided me the perfect segue to the next sort of block of questions I had for you. In your book, you write also, I quote, business has evolved, but the language that is widely used to describe business has not. Obviously, as business school, in business schools, we play an important role in defining the language and the models. So could you give us your honest critique of where perhaps business schools have gone wrong, if at all? And more important, what can we do in the future to go in the right direction?
You asked me before we came in whether there were any questions that I didn't want asked. That probably would have been one. But let me answer it in two ways. One is to say there is an inaugural lecture which I gave in 1998 when I came back to this university to help to set this institution up. And it was on the subject, is there a professional activity of management? And we've now resurrected that particular lecture on the website. And I'd invite everyone in this audience to go and have a look at it, at that. That is about the idea of creating management as a profession. One of the problems which I think arises is if I look at the materials, the marketing materials, which business schools present. And I have to say, this school is not entirely an exception in this. The word leadership occurs an extraordinary number of times. It's the idea, there is the idea, I sometimes think of it as the translation of Carlyle's idea that history is the biography of great men, that the business history is the biography of great men, and it's thanks to Steve Jobs and Bill Gates we have computers in our pockets, and Mr. Boeing that we have aeroplanes to go in and so on. And of course, all that is nonsense. We would have computers in our pockets even if Bill Gates and Steve Jobs had never been involved. The evolution of these technologies and the development of them into commercial products was something that happened as a result of the evolution of collective knowledge, what we all know together, and collective intelligence, the ability to apply that knowledge to practical problems. That's how economies and business really develop. And when I described the modern business as a collection of capabilities, that is what I had in mind. It's partly a collection of technical capabilities, knowledge and intelligence, and it's also a collection of groups, teams of people who are able to bring together that knowledge. It's not about inspired leadership, although people who occupy CEO positions in big companies tend to believe that it's their inspiration that leads them to it. And it's not surprising that quite a lot of school students and would-be executive MBA candidates are attracted to the idea that if they do these courses, they will acquire the leadership characteristics which will make them similar great men.
I have to ask you a question about our core degree program, the MBA or the executive MBA. And there's a lot of questions that sometimes asked about the future of the MBA. What are your views about the future of the MBA program? Do you think the MBA program as a degree is still as important? Should it change in certain ways? What do you feel about that?
I'm sure there should be MBAs. If you want to make management a profession in the way I described, the MBA has to be a central part of it. Some of the content of what is in the typical MBA at the moment probably ought not to be part of it. But I'm not going to take the job of just saying which should be there and which should be cut out. That's a bit contentious to come and talk to an audience like this about.
But if you had to project yourself, and let's say 5 years, 10 years out, and you said, well, if I had to design an MBA program, I'm sorry to insist on this, from scratch, is there one element that you think should be changed in the MBA program that you would love to see at present in the MBA of the future?
I think the MBA of the future, I think back, and I think the great success of Oxford in the 20th century was built on two institutions, the PPE course, which attracted an extraordinary number of talented people who went on to jobs, particularly in politics, but then elsewhere, and the Rhodes Scholarship Programme, which attracted able students from all around the world who went to back to occupy positions, many of them in politics, a number of them in business around the world. I think my idea of the business school of the future is one that in effect replicates these developments for a world in which careers in business and finance play a much larger role in determining the evolution of life. That means undergraduate and indeed postgraduate education, which replicates the success of that PPE course and prepares people with the basic knowledge they need for the challenges they will face, and the attraction of school students from around the world who will take what they learn here back and the contents they make here back to the countries from which they come.
I want you to prepare your questions. I have one more question for John. I'll come to you in the audience. Clearly, I think any discussion about management, business cannot avoid the technology developments around us, especially in artificial intelligence. In your book, in your writing, you really emphasize the importance of people and the workers and how important the intellectual capital that they bring is for the success of the business. In a world where a lot of people expect artificial general intelligence or human level capability to be achieved, most people expect in the next 5 years. How do you see, that philosophy that the human role is so important being challenged or being changed by the fact that technology systems will now become equally capable, if not more?
In Manchester City Hall, there's a painting of John Kay, not somewhat earlier John Kay, being pursued by Luddites and jumping out of a window to escape the attentions of these Luddites. The Luddites were one of the first groups of people who claimed that employment would be eliminated by the innovation of modern technology. They were right as far as their jobs were concerned. But they were not, of course, right as far as jobs generally were concerned. There were many more jobs that took the place of the handloom weavers. That's been true again and again throughout history, and I'm pretty sure it will continue to be true. The notion that people in this room are going to be unemployed because of AI, I think, is improbable. I'm reminded so much of where we were 25 years ago when we were in the dot-com boom, when people believed that the internet would change everything. The thing is, of course, the internet did change everything. It just changed it much less dramatically and more slowly than people in the market anticipated at this time. I happened to look the other day at if one had the Magnificent Seven companies in 2000, what would they have been and where are they now? The most valuable company in the world in 2000 was Cisco, which made routers for internet access. Cisco, if you bought Cisco stock in 2000, you would just about have got your money back if you sold it in 2025. Most of the other companies that were on that list no longer survive as independent entities. We tend to overestimate the short-run impact of technological change and underestimate and misunderstand the long-run impact. And I'm pretty confident that's going to be true of AI as well.
Well, we'll all have to wait and see how AI shapes up and builds up and how it impacts organizations. Okay, so we have another 15 minutes or so. I'd love to bring the audience in. I also have some questions that were pre-submitted and some questions online, but let's have the first question from the audience. I see there's a hand. What we'll do is we'll take 2 or 3 questions together and then request John to address them. One request, just keep the question brief, please.
Thank you, John, for visiting SBS again. It's an honor to have you back. My question is, obviously you were dean during SBS's founding, I think in 1996 or 1997, back when I was born. And reading online, I saw that you actually stepped down early. You were dean for about 2 years into a 5-year term. My question is, reflecting on that decision to step down as dean of SBS and seeing how the business school has evolved since then, since 1999, is there anything you would have done differently in your career, or do you think it was the right decision for the right moment?
Okay. Another question? Yes, please.
Hello, Sir John. My name's Bryce. I'm an incoming MBA student starting in September. The question I'm going to ask is about your book. I haven't got all the way through it yet, so if the question is answered somewhere in there, please forgive me. But I found the section that you had on the pharmaceutical companies trust degradation over the decades to be really, really interesting, and especially to the point of how do you regain that trust into the future. Noting that in these political times, there's an increased appetite for regulation in order to address, you could say, the moral failings of these companies. But also noting that any regulation could inhibit the ability of the company to do its core business or affect an entire industry in a very bland, flat, homogenous way. Should companies resist any government attempt to try and enforce moral standards? And if the answer is yes, how then do you best approach it from a business perspective holistically?
Thank you. Let's answer these 3 questions. We'll take some more later. John?
Sorry,
No, we'll take 3 questions. I've taken 3.
3.
So the first one was a question about your dean
Yeah.
decision. Second was about pharmaceuticals and trust.
And third?
Third, your question you just raised right now.
Oh,
Oh, we took 2?
sorry, we only have 2.
My apologies, sorry. Third one, my apologies, yeah.
Counting is a very important skill for managers to acquire.
Hi, Sir John. My name's Tobin. I'm a former EMBA. I wanted to challenge your slide that had the cat on it, because if we take away the empathy for the cat, then surely that is capitalism, and you use the invisible hand as your example. And if we believe the doctrine, then surely, you know, the cat will not get the right treatment, the owners won't be happy, and eventually the KPIs for the private equity company will have to come down, and that, in its very premise, forces capitalists to become stakeholder, keep all their stakeholders happy. And so surely capitalism is in itself, you know, stakeholder focused.
Right. If I can take these 3 questions. The first and most difficult is obviously how do I feel about Oxford and all of that. I've written at some length an article on my experience at Oxford. I think I would refer people to that to understand the frustrations which I certainly encountered in attempting to create this institution and this building in Oxford in the late 1990s. I don't think I want to say more than that, other than that I'm pleased that this school exists, that this school is successful, and that this building was constructed. Second question is, how do we restore trust in business? And that comes back to this question of professional managers who understand that creating public trust in them and what they do is central to their role in society. And that brings us back to the question of the vet. Of course, the vet is going to be concerned about making decent income, as a doctor, as is everyone else. But the vet, I value, is someone who is a professional in that object. And the professional is someone who is motivated in significant part to adopt that activity because of love of animals and love of the process of making animals better, and not just motivated by trying to make as much money as possible. And I want to see managers managers in the pharmaceutical industry who see their role in a similar light. If that's capitalism, I'm in favor of capitalism. But I prefer to think of capitalism as being what I've called and elsewhere disciplined pluralism. That means a world in which people are free to try new things, to put together new combinations of capabilities. Most of these entrepreneurial activities will fail. And disciplined pluralism means we need also to live in a society which recognizes that kind of failure and allows people to get up and start again.
Wonderful. The only one comment that I would add to the first question that you asked is that the university has changed tremendously over the last 30 years. I wasn't here when John was here, but what I can assure you is that certainly there's much more receptiveness across the university towards the business schools. So in my 3 years out here, I haven't faced, I would say, even any significant resistance from the university about the role of the business schools. That's very positive. I'm sure you played an important role in helping make that happen, John. Thank you. Some more questions. Maybe out here. Raise your hand so we can bring the microphone to you and keep it ready.
Yeah. Thank you for your talk. My question is related to the businesses that you mentioned, be it Tesla, SpaceX, Amazon, etc. When I think about the founders and managers of those businesses, it's not their managerial skills that first come to mind. So I guess I'm curious as to what you think is special about those people that provides a model for a broader managerial class.
Okay. I saw a hand somewhere. Yeah, back there, please. Yes. And
hi, I just wanted to ask you about the last thing you talked about when you were talking about the influence of AI and how it's going to affect jobs. I mean, when I think of advancing technology, I guess I assume that it's supposed to make our lives easier, and yet we talk about how we don't want all of our jobs to go away, but surely some people want more leisure or want their jobs to get easier, but then at what point are we making jobs easier just to make them less meaningful? And what do you say about the fact that we're going to all still have jobs, but maybe doing hard things in our jobs is what makes them meaningful for people? And if all the intellectual work is being done by AI, then maybe people are going to enjoy their jobs less.
okay. Okay, the third question next to you, please. Yeah.
So my question is, you mentioned capital as a service. So one of the things that people are talking about in the AI space is starting a unicorn company, a billion-dollar company, without anybody involved, just using AI agents. What's your perspective on the future of business with respect to that? Do you think that's a good way to view business, good way to build business? Because I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that.
We've one question which is about, what are the criteria that make businesses successful? What are great businesses? First of all, great businesses are built by groups of people who want to create great businesses. They're in that sense teams, combinations of capabilities which are incorporated in teams. And I talked in the end of what I had to say at the beginning about entrepreneurship. That is putting together collections of capabilities. And successful businesses are ones which either or both incorporate capabilities which are not easily reproduced by other people and are collections of capabilities that are different from the capabilities that other entrepreneurs are putting together at the time. These are the bases of business success, and these are the things that create economic rents, which I would like to have a larger role and a less disparaging role in talking about industrial economics than it's typically given at the moment. We have more questions about artificial intelligence, AI. What is artificial intelligence going to do? Are we going to create businesses which are run by AI? If we ask what the real achievements of AI so far are or appear to be likely to be, they are largely in increasing the effectiveness and reducing the employment in relatively mundane white-collar jobs in the way that robotics substituted for employment but created new opportunities in assembly line processes of various kinds. So that in medicine and law, for example, quite a lot of the routine activity which quite well-trained professionals have historically been doing, is likely to be taken over by that. Do I think the outcome of that is going to be that we're going to see AI-run firms? I rather doubt it, and I won't be rushing to buy products from them. What AI has limited capacity to do, because AI, as I understand it, bases its knowledge on existing material. The knowledge, the creativity, which has been behind so much economic and business advance for so many hundreds of years, is something which we will still definitely need.
We're coming towards the end of our session with John, so I'll take a question that was submitted online. And the question really is, given your experience with Oxford and your critique of corporations, what kind of governance model do you think suits 21st century organizations, particularly those managing change and innovation? Another question that was submitted before the event is, so the first one is about governance model. So the question before the event was, what would be an impactful way to bring the private sector more on board for the net zero transformation of the Western economies? Let's take these two questions.
Firstly, what kind of governance models do we need? I think the good answer to that is a whole variety of different governance models. And I think one of the mistakes which we've made over the last 50 years has been to think that the shareholder-owned corporation, or the sensibly shareholder-owned corporation, because in reality the shareholders owned their shares, but did not in any interesting sense own the company. The belief that was not only the ideal, but really the only possible model of most commercial activities has been very damaging. I think we need a whole variety of governance models. I think we have, at the moment, different mechanisms of accountability in terms of regulation, audit, non-executive directors and the like, none of which are working terribly well. And I think we need to have a serious dialogue in business schools about how we make these more effective. Given that business is going to be run by professional managers, how do we create effective accountability for these? I'm reluctant to get involved in discussion of net zero and the like. Let me just say that I do not think, I am strongly in favour of the world reducing its total climate emissions. I think that very little of what is currently being proposed or implemented around the world is actually contributing much to that. And I hope we can, and I hope again that business schools can play a part in that, of having a more effective discussion of that kind. I might end with a story that I've talked earlier today about ICI and successive recaps on that story. One I can tell is the story of talking about ICI at a conference in 2006, just before ICI finally died as an independent company. And a few days after that, I got a pained letter from the ICI's Vice President for Corporate Social Responsibility. And the letter said, roughly speaking, that ICI may have screwed up the business, but we did a great job on corporate social responsibility. I thought, you have so little idea of what the corporate social responsibility of business really is.
Okay, thank you so much, John. As always, it's fascinating to listen to you and have a discussion with you. It's really a privilege. Many of our audience are in the MBA program, or they're students in other programs, or they're looking to join Oxford programs. Any words of advice for the younger generation? What can they strive for? What should they aim for the next years of their lives and careers?
Go out and create great businesses.
Well, that's a very apt mission and a goal for all of you. And I think you heard John describe also what he thinks is a great business. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for sharing your views and wisdom with us in the audience. And what I can assure you, John, is that the foundations you put in place at the site school many years ago, even if they were brief, they have been very powerful and very formative for us. And even though I joined the school many years later, I do feel your words, your impact on us even today. So thank you for what you've done for Site Business School. We're always very grateful, and thank you for being here this evening with us.
Well, thank you for asking me here.
I have a small set of gifts for John so that he can take them with us, show the logo of the Site School, and also a nice little T-shirt that he can wear and walk around proudly. Thank you so much, John. A few other goodies inside that. Hopefully you enjoy it.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining us. We'll have some refreshments outside. Thank you for joining us. Please feel free to stay on and have a discussions with John outside. Thank you. Thank you so much.